Welcome to another technology video. Today we're going to be talking about the electronic assisted steering system. And this is a totally OEM system that will allow you to basically hook into a Pro 700 or IntelliView 4 display, or also an IntelliView 3 or Pro 300 display. So within the system you will have two different brands, the Case IH ElectroSteer and the New Holland IntelliSteer Lite. Both of these will include the motor drive unit, which actually turns the steering wheel once it's hooked up. You'll also have a ring gear, and the ring gear basically allows the motor drive unit to actually steer the steering wheel. And you'll have a top ring that mounts to the top of the steering wheel. And then you'll also have some spacer rings which will sit underneath the steering wheel and basically allow different installations to be performed based on the model and based on the steering wheel configuration. The anti-rotation bracket is actually something that hooks into the motor drive unit, and this allows the motor drive unit not to swivel once it's mounted in place. You'll also have the brains of the operation, which includes the ECU S1 and a mounting plate that already is pre-drilled for the nav controller locations on the specific vehicle that you have. And if you have questions about supported platform lists, you can look online and find more information about that. You'll also have harnessing. So we have harnessing for a AccuGuide or IntelliSteer ready vehicle. We're doing an install on T7 today. So you also have options for maybe some older vehicles out there that may not have the harnessing already built in, and maybe you want to interface with a steering angle sensor or something like that. So if you want more information on harnessing, you can look in eTIM and find more availability as far as parts in your specific vehicle platform. So with that being said, we'll go through the installation process in this T7 and we'll show you how to hook this thing up.
So the first step will be to go ahead and take the ring gear apart. So we'll just need an Allen wrench for that. And the trick is to be gentle with this because it is pretty stiff when you initially take it apart. So we'll go ahead and put that on the steering column and just be sure to be gentle with it again, putting it back together. It's a very tight clearance or tolerance on these Allen wrench bolts. So we'll go ahead and put the top ring on. This will be different depending upon which vehicle that you have. But since we're in a Puma or a T7 platform, this is the one that we'll use. And we'll go ahead and put those screws in there and then tighten them up with an Allen wrench. Make sure to use a spacer ring as well. Then we need to basically expand the steering column and then take out the screws that are already existing. There are 3 screws in this platform. And what we want to do is install the anti-rotation bracket where those screw mounts are at. So we'll take the screws out and we'll use the same screws that we just took out in order to mount the anti-rotation bracket. You may need an angle screwdriver to get to these as there's not a lot of room for a full-size screwdriver. Once we have that out, we're going to put in the bracket for the anti-rotation pin, which we'll use later. That's just 2 bolts and 2 wing nuts that we need to tighten. After we have that on, we will go ahead and take the motor drive unit and go ahead and install that. Just be sure that the ring gear sets in the correct spot. We don't want to put it in the wrong set of grooves. That's a common problem initially. And once we have that mounted, we'll go ahead and take the anti-rotation pin And using the locations already pre-mounted in the motor drive unit, we'll go ahead and tighten these up with a Allen wrench. Once we have that in place, we will put the ECU S1 into its bracket and mount it in the existing nav controller spot. From there we have two harnesses. One will plug into the existing IntelliSteer AccuGuide Ready harness. So we'll just use a Allen wrench to tighten that up. And then one side of that harness will plug into the connector on our ECU S1. So again, we'll tighten that up using either a socket or maybe a screwdriver. And then we plug in our 40-pin connector from the other harness. So we'll go ahead and tighten that up. And then one side of this harness will go to the power connections, either on the battery or inside the cab, depending upon the model. In this case, we have a fuse protected harness that goes right inside the cab here for power. And then once we have that hooked up, we take the other side of the other harness and hook that into the motor drive assembly so that can receive power. Okay, so the next step, in order to set up the electronic assisted steering, we need to go to one of the addresses below, either through Ethernet or through Wi-Fi. The Ethernet cable can be found on the harness that is existing that will plug into the ECU S1. If you are using Wi-Fi, it's important to note that you have to stay in the calibrations nav screen the whole time, otherwise Wi-Fi connection will be lost. And you will see the following screen pop up. We need to go into Setup Wizard, and then from there we just choose the type of vehicle that we're setting up, and we will choose the brand. So in this case it's going to be a New Holland. So we'll go ahead and go to the next step and choose the model, which in our case it's going to be a T7.175. And this is just basically allowing us to choose whether or not we have an MDU installed or not. We'll go ahead and name the vehicle from here. So we're just going to name it T7.175. And this is asking us if we have a wheel angle sensor accessory. We're going to choose no, because we're going to get that off of the vehicle can. We'll go ahead and put in our measurements, just like we would in a normal AccuGuide or IntelliSteer system. The ECU S1 also needs to know its position, and the picture with a star as displayed is where we need to measure from. We will choose Get Orientation to get our orientations. It's recommended to do that automatically rather than manually entering these in. We will go ahead and set the manual override. Pressing start will engage the drive motor, and then we can adjust this as desired. We will press save to save the limit. Once we have our vehicle set up, we can check the GPS diagnostics. We can view certain things like HDOP. We can also see our NEMA messages. There's other things we can see, such as NEMA status and some of the details related to that as well. If we go back and go underneath the GPS setup, it's important to note we want to make sure that the baud rate and the format is the same as what we have set up in the display. So we also need to set up these GPS settings in Diagnostics RDI. So we will navigate over to Configuration. Then we need to go to GPS Configuration. Then we will go over to Port A Config. And we need to make sure that Port A Config is set for an output of 8N1 NEMA 115K. The next setup is we need to make sure that CFG is set to out and RTS, CTS should set to be off. From there, we need to make sure that CFG is set to NEMA 1 and GGA needs to be in capital letters indicating that it is on. From there, we will find config NEMA 2 and we need to make sure that VTG and ZDA are both turned on or in capital letters. From there, we will go to config NEMA 3 and we need to make sure that none of these settings are turned on. So all of these should be in lowercase. From there, we will go to config NEMA out and we need to make sure that ASAP is in capital letters. The last string is the config and we need to make sure that that's set to 1 Hz NEMA and we need to make sure that VTG is in lowercase letters or set to off.